Counseling with a lady a couple of weeks ago, and as we shared, she was telling me her story, and she was telling me about how when she was just a young child, her father left, and her mother, who had passed away just recently, had raised her from that day on, and she was just a young girl and became part of a single-parent family. And she said, "You know, Pastor Wayne, I got a hold of a book, and it just changed my life, and it changed my attitude." She said, "When I read this book, I developed an attitude of gratitude." And she said, "I didn't feel sorry for myself any longer. I thought, I am so blessed," she said, "to have this amazing mother. This mother who is working so hard to raise me and look after me and provide for me." And she said, "When I read this book, I was 14 years of age, and the book," and of course I jumped up and down when she said the book, but The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. And of course, the true title of that book was The Power of Faith, right? But Norman was counseled to call it The Power of Positive Thinking because he was asked, who do you want to reach with this book? And he said, "I want to reach people who are struggling with their faith or don't have any faith, or people who are outside the church." And they said, "Well, then we got to change the title. If we're going to reach those people, we got to change the title." And of course, it was so sad because so many people in the church and so many ministers and leaders judged him for that. But this woman was a testimony, and there are thousands, there are millions of them. I'm one of them. Changed my whole attitude to that attitude of gratitude. The way we look at things, what a difference it makes. Thanksgiving, as all of us know, is not the only time for us to gather and to give thanks. We need to learn to be people who live in thanksgiving every day. Cicero, the great Roman statesman and philosopher, called gratitude the parent of all virtues. Do you know that the first scientific study of gratitude didn't happen in our world until 2003? And as a result of that scientific study, the results were staggering. The benefits were staggering of this attitude of gratitude. It's more than just an emotional sugar rush. On every front, the scientists said, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, relationally, academically, athletically, gratitude reduces the aches and pains of life. Gratitude changes everything. A large dog walks into a butcher shop, carrying a purse in its mouth. He puts the purse down. He sits in front of the meat case. The butcher says, jokingly, "What is it, boy? You want to buy some meat?" "Woof," barks the dog. Says the butcher. "What kind? Liver, bacon, steak?" "Woof," interrupts the dog. "And how much steak? Half a pound? 1 pound?" "Woof." The amazed butcher wraps up the meat and finds the money in the dog's purse. As the dog leaves, the butcher decides, I got to figure out what's going on here. And so he decides to follow the dog. The dog enters into an apartment building, climbs to the 3rd floor, and begins scratching at the door. With that, the door swings open, and an angry man starts shouting at this dog. "Stop," yells the butcher. "This is the most intelligent animal I've ever seen." "Intelligent," says the man. This is the third time this week he's forgotten his key. He wasn't very thankful, was he? He wasn't thankful. If you contrast that story with the story of Pam, who worked in the inner city in Chicago, every morning she encountered a heavy-set, middle-aged woman in a shabby coat soliciting spare change in front of an old brick church. She greeted everyone with a smile and a pleasant good morning. Pam almost always gave her something. After almost a year of this routine, however, the woman in the shabby coat disappeared. Pam wondered what had happened to her. Then one beautiful day, she was in front of the church again, still wearing the same shabby coat. As Pam reached into her purse for the usual donation, the woman stopped her. "Oh, thank you for helping me all those days that you gave me money," she said. "You won't see me again because I've got a job now." And with that, she reached into a bag and handed Pam a wrapped package. She'd been standing at her old spot waiting, not for a handout, but for the people she recognized so that she could give each of them a donut. She was thankful, right? She was thankful, and she wanted to share it. One of the people that's helped me to learn about gratitude in the secular world is Melody Beattie. In her amazing book, The Language of Letting Go, she says, actually in a quote from her other book, Codependent No More, we learn the magical lesson that making the most of what we have turns it into more. Say thank you until you mean it, she says. Thank God, life, and the universe for everyone and everything sent your way. Gratitude unlocks the fullness of life. It turns what we have into enough and more. You know what? It turns denial into acceptance, chaos to order, and confusion to clarity. It can turn a meal into a feast, a house into a home, a stranger into a friend. It turns problems into gifts, Melody says, failures into successes, the unexpected into perfect timing, and mistakes into important events. Gratitude makes things right. Gratitude turns negative energy into positive energy. That's what my friend had learned from the power of positive thinking. That's what I learned from the power of positive thinking so many years ago. Instead of blaming my problems, my struggles on everyone else, I learned to take responsibility for it and recognize the fact that in those difficult times of struggle, that my Creator was with me and that He could turn all those negative things into the very things that would bless my life and make my life good, right? As we look at these lepers, may we learn to be grateful in the hard times. See, that's the key. If you can be grateful in these times of struggle, if you can be grateful, Pat's prayer touched on that this morning so powerfully. If you can, as you go through the tests, right, if you can turn those things with God's help into the triumphs, those testing moments become those positive moments that change our lives. And so we can learn to be grateful in the difficult times, in the hard times. I love the story of these lepers. And I think that often we focus just on the one leper, which is the natural way to go, right? I mean, it's obvious. He's the Samaritan. He's the guy that doesn't fit. 9 of these are men of the Jewish faith, right? They're people of the Jewish faith. And so they're the ones that you sort of expect to be grateful and to come back, but maybe not. They just did what Jesus told them. He told them to go to the priest, and they were of the Jewish faith. And the priest not only preached the word, but the priest was the one that people went to if someone claimed a healing, right? And the priest would inspect them to find out whether or not they were really healed. Now, I know that often these guys are portrayed, these 9 are portrayed as really ungrateful people, right? A word or two on their behalf maybe is in order this morning. They all approached him and called out to him, all 10 of them, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." They all obeyed his command to go show themselves to the priest. As we hear their retreating footsteps, let's give them more respect than maybe we usually do. They're heading in the direction he told them to head. They're not heading for a bar, right? They're not heading to a casino or a house of ill repute, right? They headed for the priest. And this is, remember, before they have even seen any evidence of their cleansing. So let's cut them some slack. They knew to whom to call out for healing. They believed him when he said it was a done deal, even before the evidence was before their eyes. And they did what he said. He didn't say, "Go show yourselves to the priest. But on the way, as soon as you see your flesh has been cured, hightail it back to me with a thank you note." They went. We don't hear that about the 10th one, right? No. He noticed as he went that he was healed. And anyway, why would he go to a Jewish priest, right? He was a Samaritan. He was despised by the Jews, right? And so the purpose of visiting the priest in the first place after a cure was so the cured person could officially resume his place in society. Now, it's hard for us to imagine how isolated these lepers were. I mean, they had to walk around about 60 yards from everyone else, right? And they had to shout out everywhere they went where there might be people, "Unclean, unclean." And so people would stay away from them. Now, can you imagine? These 9 lepers, all 10 of them in fact, probably had family, had loved ones who could no longer fellowship with them. Times like Thanksgiving, how much we long for those times with family and with friends and with our extended family, as has been mentioned here this morning. We have that, we're blessed. But imagine the isolation that these lepers had. I would think if I was one of those 9 lepers, I could hardly wait to go to the priest, to have the priest inspect my healing, to tell me if I can go home, and I would be on my way to see my wife, to see my children, my grandchildren. I would be on my way to be with my family and all of those that I had lost and left behind. I think their minds were full of scenes of reunion with wives and children, with re-entry into the market and the synagogue. There's no indication that their goals and future actions were anything but respectable and legal. But they were lacking something. The one leper, the foreigner, the Samaritan, who returned to thank God, the words that are used in the Greek language here are different. The others were healed, but this, for the one leper, the Samaritan, he was made well. He was made well. The word that's used in the Greek means to be healed of spiritual disease and death. Spiritual disease and spiritual death. Whereas the 9 were merely cleansed or healed. And in the Greek word that's used, it means to be made clean or healed of a disease. The physical cure, the verb used twice and translated made clean and healed, is not the same then as the Greek word that's used for the Samaritan. He has made you well. He has made you whole. A condition that we refer to in our Christian faith as salvation. He has experienced salvation. Not only physical healing, but spiritual healing. He has experienced salvation. When Jesus says, your faith has made you well, he uses this verb. You have experienced new life in Christ. That's what's happened. Only the foreigner is grateful for the grace that he has received. The others are thinking solely of the benefits received. The ungrateful 9, as they have often been called, exemplify the general attitude of the Jewish people toward Jesus' mission. The Samaritan is prophetic then of the future response of non-Jews to the gospel. There's meant to be a connection, I think, to our minds between this account and the parable of the Good Samaritan, which we talked about not too long ago, where again, 2 Jews, their minds thinking ahead to their liturgical duties, neglect the wounded neighbor on the side of the road. But the Samaritan, the despised sinner, is the one who reaches out. How does Jesus' emphasis on gratitude impact my individual life? How does it impact your life? How does it impact our church? Why is gratitude so crucial to wholeness of mind, body, and spirit? To what the New Testament calls salvation. It seems to be more than proving to Jesus that we have good manners, right? That our parents taught us to write thank you notes. In the passage, the leper returns and thanks Jesus. But note Jesus' interpretation of these words in verse 18 that was read this morning. Was no one found to return and give thanks to God except this foreigner? Why is gratitude to God crucial to wholeness of mind, body, and spirit? Apparently, to be made well, we must add thanksgiving to our faith. That's what true faith looks like. So, an attitude of gratitude is essential in the life of a believer. If we don't have an attitude of gratitude, we have to question our faith. We have to look at our faith and we have to ask the Holy Spirit to shine the searchlight of His love on our hearts if we don't have an attitude of gratitude. The person who makes such an acknowledgement experiences a salvation that goes beyond the merely physical cure. It's a reorientation of our inner life. That's what's happening. That attitude of gratitude demonstrates that then. Wow. So, a couple of things as we bring this message to a close this morning. First of all, we need to learn to be grateful in the difficult times. Beth Moore, in her book, Jesus, the One and Only, tells of an occasion that she had to be near a modern-day leper colony. Something within her had always wanted to minister in a leper colony, but her trip overseas had given her the first opportunity to be near such a place. She walked by the entrance 3 times. She saw those who were suffering. She begged herself for a chance to go inside, but she couldn't do it. The reason? The smell overwhelmed her. She could not work up the stomach to go inside the colony. She could not bear the thought of witnessing for the Lord, but at the same time becoming violently ill as she faced human beings already acutely aware that they were so different. The trip passed and she was not able to go inside. You know, I think she was human, just like us, right? To go into some of those situations, all of us have said, I don't know how people can do these jobs. I don't know how people can care for people in that time in their life and through the struggles in their life. Some people are called by God to do that, and some certainly aren't. But maybe some of us are called to do things that we don't think we're called to do, or that we don't want to be called to do. And so we have to be really careful that we don't make excuses not to take action, right? Because we need to be grateful in doing God's work, in the work that God has called us to. We need to be grateful and to go forward with that attitude of gratitude. See, this kind of thankfulness, as June mentioned earlier, about worship. This is what worship looks like. It looks like people who take action, right? Because I think that's the next step here. We need to make sure that our attitude of gratitude leads to action, right? How do I express that? How do I express it? Jesus says, go and show yourselves to the priests. He never commanded that any of them express thankfulness to God or return to him, the healer. Nevertheless, that is what Jesus expected. What kind of action is Jesus looking for from me, from you? Could there be a better time than Thanksgiving Sunday to ask a question like that? God's given us so much. Has God's Holy Spirit been urging you towards some action step? Has the Lord been tugging at you for another step of faith? Is there a family, a friend, or even a stranger in need of help this Thanksgiving season? Is there something that you feel compelled to do? You know, folks, based on what Jesus was looking for 2,000 years ago, to take this action step, I assume that God is pulling us towards that step, that action, and he will help us to accomplish it. It isn't something we have to do in our own strength or our own power. Otherwise, a prayer over the Thanksgiving meal will last about as long as that sensation of fullness after the meal. Oh, I'm so full, I'll never eat again. Probably tomorrow we will. Right? Probably tomorrow we will. I don't know about you, but no matter how full I get on Thanksgiving, I can always manage to eat the next day. Shouldn't our spirit of thanksgiving last longer than that, right? Shouldn't it last longer than that? May this be an attitude of gratitude. For an attitude of gratitude is really a lifestyle of wellness, of wholeness, of the fullness of God's Spirit in our hearts and lives. Yesterday we had the great joy of having our brand new grandson come for Thanksgiving dinner. And after him being born 6 weeks premature and the scare that we all went through with that, what great joy to have that little guy there and to realize what a blessing he is, and to watch as his mom and dad looked after him and blessed him, and as all of us wanted to hold him, right? I thought to myself when I watched him, I thought, that little guy is totally dependent, right? Totally dependent on his mom and dad. He's totally dependent on others. And I thought to myself, you know what? There are people out there, whether I realize it or not, that are totally dependent on me sharing God's love with them. On me taking that action step and living that attitude of gratitude lifestyle, right? That's what I'm called to do. Jesus says to this very thankful man, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." This is the word. You've been saved. You've been saved. Like we thought when Riordan was born. It's a word actually that was used for the safe delivery of a baby. It was often used in that way. And they also used it for people who escaped other dangerous situations. Sailors surviving a storm at sea had been saved. When Matthew began his gospel, he started with the Christmas story. The angel told Joseph to name the Christ child Jesus, because that name meant that he would save his people from their sins. And so, as we bring this message to a close this morning, may our hearts confess with our mouth, Jesus is Lord, and believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, and we will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you confess that you are saved. And Jesus says to this very thankful man, willing to follow God before his circumstances changed, to worship God before he returned home. And Jesus pronounces a complete healing, a wellness that all other wellness, a wellness that passes all other wellness terminology. This man said, he understands. Do we understand? Do we understand?